Welcome to Kabbalah Explained Simply. Today we're going to discuss a fascinating topic. To what extent, in secret, some of the greatest minds in Western civilization and beyond were quietly studying the wisdom of Kabbalah. And actually, this is what brought me to the wisdom of Kabbalah, because I always like to study, I like to learn, I like to go to the greatest minds throughout history and see what they thought. And we're going to go through some of the rare writings from those great minds, some of the preeminent thinkers of their time, and we're going to see what they had to say. Remember, books used to be very expensive. For much of history, the only book really was the Bible, because books could be more than we would spend on a car relative to today's money. It was like buying a car to buy a book. So not a lot of nonsense was really printed, and many villages would only have maybe one Bible for everyone to share, or maybe you knew somebody who had it. And it was this way until the 1400s, when the printing press came about, but books were still quite expensive. Similar to buying like a MacBook these days. They were quite expensive. So it wasn't like today where there's a bunch of nonsense. So if you committed something to paper, you probably felt pretty adamant about it. So we're going to look at some of these books, starting with the Torah, where it says, "To the sons of the concubines who belonged to Abraham, Abraham gave gifts. While he was still living, he sent them eastward, away from Isaac, his son, to the land of the east." Now, what was Abraham all about? He was a regular guy. That's how he started. In fact, his father was an idol worshiper. And by the way, in Kabbalistic terms, idol worshiper basically just means that you believe that there's more than one force governing reality, meaning you haven't discovered that all that we see around us is kind of like croutons. And these croutons really belong to a soup that unites them all. But you don't feel between all of these events in your life that there's this soup permeating all of reality. And it, and not the croutons, is actually what is making everything move in the ways that it moves. And we try to explain why things move in our lives, and we don't get it right. We draw all kinds of conclusions because we don't perceive this force that is more powerful than gravity. Gravity is an offshoot of it, just one of its many instantiations. And this soup is called the upper force. It's called the creator, none else besides him, if you will, in Kabbalistic language. And Abraham was somebody who, just like all of us, didn't feel this soup that connects everything and moves everything. And his father even materialized what for us is just multiple forces. You know, your wife, your boss, the police, the courts. There's all kinds of people, political people who can, cause events in our life, cause problems, make it good, make it bad. So he actually, and people still do this in certain parts of the world, created representations of these multi-forces. And they were little idols, they were little dolls. And he worshipped them. He worshipped these dolls. There's other versions of this, worshipping the Nile, worshipping the god of fire, the ancient Greek gods, the Roman gods, etc. But Abraham was the first one who shattered the idols, which means basically he said these guys are just emissaries of this singular force. I want to have a relationship with the real soup, the force that's really governing all these pawns. And so he discovered this upper force, got to know it, delved into himself further, meaning into the reality that is a representation of the self. He researched it, and his research led to what is now known as the wisdom of Kabbalah. And he sent, with his sons, he sent partial Kabbalah for reasons known to him. So something that was not false, something that was true but partial, not the full Kabbalah, for reasons that he understood were beneficial. And on these foundations come many religions, many methods. Really, there's about more than 5,000 methods or religions in the world today. And one day we'll strip them down, strip off all kinds of dressings upon them and adornments upon them. And we'll see that there, behind them, at their essence, meaning what they really are, meaning what really matters about them, what's important about them, is part of the wisdom of Kabbalah. And in this, it's true and it's beneficial. And for certain people, it worked very well in helping them organize their corporeality, their life in this world, their relationships to each other, and their relationship while living in this world to what's going to happen to them in the next world. Whether it's an actual true interpretation of what happens in the next world isn't the important thing. Meaning everybody can say whatever they want, whatever they think happens in the next world, that's fine. That's not what's important. That's what we can later on, we will undress, we will discard it. And what's important, though, is what that attitude does for you while you're in this life. And he gave them these gifts that they could use during their life, and it would be beneficial for them. And they only worked also for certain people. So people who are in the East benefited from a certain kind of attitude according to their nature. People in the West according to a different kind of attitude. So he sent the sons of his concubines with a certain partial Kabbalah, not the full thing, because the full thing was not ripe for everyone at that time. Okay, so next we're going to look at some modern philosophers. The first one is Alfred North Whitehead. So he was a mathematician, philosopher. He co-authored Principia Mathematica with famous mathematician and philosopher Bertrand Russell. He pioneered process philosophy. He was a Harvard professor, and he was a fellow of the Royal Society, and he shaped 20th century logic. I'm giving you all of this because for me, as somebody who, when I came to the wisdom of Kabbalah, didn't have a religious bone in my body, and I didn't like mysticism. I didn't like anything that even had a whisper of not being based on logic and research and empiricism. So that's why I'm giving you the background of each of these guys, because it's what gave it weight for me. And so maybe there are others who feel similarly. Okay, so he says, the safest general characterization of the European philosophical tradition is that it consists of a series of footnotes to Plato. That's interesting. So all of these great philosophers, Nietzsche, Hume, and so on, he's saying that they're just footnotes on Plato, right? The next one. So Reuchlin. He was from 1455 to 1522. He revived Hebrew and Greek studies. He produced authoritative grammars, making him a central architect of Northern Renaissance philology. So a person such as this is like one of the most learned people in the world at the time. Remember, people didn't really go to school at this time unless they were kings. People really lived in a way it's hard for us to imagine now, truly in the yard. People lived and maybe built a little shack over themselves and, worked in the field. If they were lucky, they had a field job. So the few people that lived in the world right, at this time and actually studied and learned, there weren't many of them. And this was one of the foremost of those people. And he says, my teacher, Pythagoras, who is the father of philosophy, did nevertheless not receive those teachings from the Greeks, but rather received them from the Jews. Therefore, he must be called a Kabbalist. And he himself was the first to convert the name Kabbalah, unknown to the Greeks, in the Greek name philosophy. So that's very interesting. And I can tell you too, we can play with the history dates and whatever we want to do. But later on, we'll see, like I said, that when you strip down all of the dressings, all of the prettifications that have been done to the religions, to the philosophies, and so on, we'll uncover and we will be able to prove. And by the way, one who becomes a Kabbalist themselves clearly proves in a way that no historical research can even dig up, that all of this stuff, the philosophy, all of the rest of it, actually comes from the wisdom of Kabbalah. And that's what he says here. My teacher Pythagoras, who is the father of philosophy, and remember the previous guy said that everything's a footnote on Plato, and Pythagoras was the precursor to Plato. He did nevertheless not receive those teachings from the Greeks, but rather he received them from the Jews. And if we look at a map, if you can look at a Google map, you can see that the Greece is very close. You can get in some type of little small watercraft, and you can make your way over to Israel. But rather he received them from the Jews, therefore he must be called a Kabbalist. Okay, I don't know about that, but he himself was the first to convert the name Kabbalah, unknown to the Greeks, in the Greek name philosophy. Now we're going to discuss later why even the most brilliant minds can study the wisdom of Kabbalah, so-called, learn everything about it, but still not be Kabbalists, because there's something you got to do to become a Kabbalist, by which if you become a Kabbalist, you get all of the knowledge. You can go win a few Nobel Prizes or become a great historian. You get all of the knowledge that has ever been and can ever be found in this world. But by having all of the knowledge of this world and the highest IQ, it still won't help you reach the wisdom of Kabbalah, meaning it won't allow you to open up the spiritual world. And for that, actually, you don't need any greatness in academic greatness. You don't need to be smart. You need something else. So he says that the name philosophy itself eventually came from the wisdom of Kabbalah. And then all of his philosophy, Pythagoras, Plato, and according to Whitehead, all of the rest of philosophy is built on Plato. All of it comes from the wisdom of Kabbalah. So after the wisdom of Kabbalah, you have armchair philosophications about what it is, what it might be, what it could be, and so on. And by the way, that's a certain kind of, I would have to say, small desire. A small desire. So just as in our world, you have those who all they need to do is become a cashier or become like a manager, a supervisor at McDonald's. And then you have those that have to go and build companies or become the president. So too with these matters, with spiritual matters, there are those that only need to kind of know a little bit and philosophize about it. And it can be like a side thing in their life, a little hobby. There are those who have to become like the Olympians, right? Like, I like to work out, but I don't want to become an Olympic athlete. I have a small desire for that. And there are also those who only have a small desire for the wisdom of Kabbalah, meaning they can read about it their entire lives. In fact, you have Kabbalah PhDs who study the wisdom of Kabbalah their entire life. There's a handful of well-known ones. In fact, one of the most well-known ones, he wrote a poem at the end of his life kind of lamenting the fact that he studied the wisdom of Kabbalah, became an expert in it. He became the world's foremost expert in the wisdom of Kabbalah, not the wisdom itself, but the knowledge about the wisdom of Kabbalah. But he never entered it himself, meaning he never opened up those spiritual worlds that the Kabbalists talk about, the control room for our reality. He was content to be learning about it, about its possibility. So that's why there's a question here. He says, therefore, he must be called a Kabbalist, meaning Pythagoras. I don't know if Pythagoras was a Kabbalist, but he definitely studied the wisdom of Kabbalah. And that's because at that time, Kabbalists were not hiding it yet. There came a time when they started hiding the wisdom of Kabbalah. There, they were freely teaching anyone who wanted to learn. Okay, let's move on to the next. Oh, it's another quote from Reuchlin. So he says, Pythagoras' philosophy emanated from the infinite sea of Kabbalah. So in that, he's correct, that all of what Pythagoras taught and wrote, and what Plato then took from him, and all of the philosophers were footnotes on that, that's only a sliver of the ocean of wisdom that's revealed to the Kabbalists. Because what we've revealed in our reality, even today, centuries after Reuchlin, is only a mustard seed relative to a universe of the knowledge that exists, of what's there. In fact, none of what's there, barely any, is even written in the wisdom of Kabbalah. Because it's left for the person to reveal it and not to write it in books. And Kabbalists aren't motivated to go and win Nobel Prizes, though they could. They're not motivated for that. They're interested in teaching us how to attain what they attained, meaning they don't want to be this sage-like, godly, rabbi, Kabbalist, something that you just worship and follow your whole life and believe what they say. They're only interested in opening their mouth or moving their pen across the page if it's going to help someone reveal what they revealed. And if they can't do that, then they would prefer to be in complete secret, hiding, nobody knowing their name, nobody knowing that they're Kabbalists. So that's a big difference between a Kabbalist, meaning how he feels like behaving, and a philosopher. A philosopher wants to write many books, win a Nobel Prize, be famous, get a nice burial, a beautiful grave in a special cemetery, and a Kabbalist doesn't care about that. So here's what Pico della Mirandola, who lived in the 1400s, said. So he was a Renaissance prodigy. At 23, the age of 23, he announced 900 theses for public defense in Rome, mastering many languages and traditions, celebrated by leading humanists for audacious, wide-ranging scholarship. So he was a very, very well-respected and smart man. And he says, this true interpretation of the law, which was revealed to Moses in godly tradition, is called Kabbalah, which to Hebrews is the same for us as receiving. Meaning Kabbalah, as you may know, means in Hebrew, reception, because all we're trying to do in this world is receive pleasure. Like I just received the pleasure of coffee, and later I'll receive the pleasure of swimming or whatever it is. And so Kabbalah is the method of how to receive pleasure, such that you'll actually receive and not feel darkness all the time. And so he's actually right that the true interpretation of the law, by which he means the Torah, which was revealed to Moses in godly tradition, is called Kabbalah. So the whole Torah, all that stuff out of which billions of people made this religion and that religion and another religion and 15 different spin-offs of that religion, that was all just about receiving pleasure, meaning our state on a daily basis, which is to always chase after a filet mignon or some wine, something. It's all about receiving pleasure. And the Torah is about how to actually do it, because we're in a world where the greatest disease is depression. And people are trying to medicate it, and it's not working. This is the actual medication that we need. Kabbalah is called a segula, a remedy, a medicine. So it's the medicine for the plight of our most fundamental condition, out of which all the other problems come. All the problems come, the reason why there's wars across the global stage, and political wars, and all kinds of other things, divorces, is because we can't figure out how to fulfill ourselves, because we're limited in what we can receive. We're just limited in our options, the availability. That's how reality treats us, with limited options. And even if we're in a situation where we happen to be some special pawn of the creator, like an Elon Musk or famous people, still there we see that no matter how much ability we have to bring good things into our life, they don't satisfy us. Even if you're the ruler of Russia, you still want some more land, or the ruler of China, you still want some more something. And so we have a problem with our most fundamental nature that isn't this body. Behind, you find that the essence of it is not any of those things that I think I am. I am just a will to receive. You are a will to receive. Everybody is a will to receive. All the planets in the sky are actually, behind this dressing, wills to receive. A solar system, a cluster of wills to receive. So all of reality is a will to receive. And the fundamental problem is its inability to ever be fulfilled. So we are all in varying degrees of depression, and trying to overcome it. We have various strategies, and some are better than others, but all of us has this problem, because this law is over us like gravity is over us. We're inside gravity, whether we like it or not, and we're inside this law where the pleasure, capacity, and ability to use it are restricted. And so we need this, and this is the only reason why there's such a thing called the Torah, the Bible, because of this. So it's not all about what it seems to be about, that it's about some Hebrews that fought some wars, that lived in some land, that went to some Egypt. All of that was what this guy actually correctly says here. Mr. Pico, he says that the true interpretation of the law, which was revealed to Moses, is called Kabbalah, which is receiving. So Kabbalah is the wisdom of reception. So I don't know if Pico was an actual Kabbalist, but he's very on point with that. He goes on to say, in whole, there are two sciences, also with a name they honored them. The one is called Combinandi, and it is a measure of the progress in scientists. I don't know. The other one treats the forces of the higher things, which are over the moon, which is the highest part of Magia Naturalis. The Hebrews call both of them Kabbalah. So again, he has a correct understanding. Like I said, that when you reveal, not just study in a book, but reveal for yourself what's in that book, then you see that we're in one system that includes our world and the spiritual world, 5 spiritual worlds and perhaps even more, but 5 general spiritual worlds, and what in the Bible was later interpreted to mean like heaven, hell. These things are actually just talking about us. They're talking about our situation, which is the worst possible that can exist, because without the wisdom of Kabbalah, the wisdom of how to receive, we're going to try to receive all our life in vain. It's not going to work out. As they say, one dies with half of their desires still unfulfilled, still in their hands. So we're going to see that also all of the suffering of our life, if we would do correct bookkeeping, would outweigh all of the pleasures, which was the aim of everything. Like, I won't go to work unless I know I'm getting a good paycheck worth more than the effort expended. And in our life, we're going to see that we did a very bad business deal, that we suffered much more. Whether we're Elon Musk, Trump, whoever, we suffered much more than the pleasure that we got back. So very bad business deal this life. And so what we discover is that heaven isn't something that I get to go to after this life, because that's what would have made it okay, and throughout history made it okay, that clearly we suffer way too much to even go on living in this world. It's not worth it. However, if I get heaven afterwards, it will make it all okay. Now, a true interpretation of that would be more than correct. Much more than correct. In fact, Bala Sulam says that even for just a taste of spirituality, were one to know what it is, he would be willing to cut his hands and legs off 7 times a day just for a taste. So for sure it's worth it, but it's not after we die. It's only if I reveal it while I'm still alive. And Olam Hazeh, this world, and Olam Haba, the next world, or Shamayim, which is the same thing, heavens, was interpreted to mean heaven. And then from that, we begin to write all kinds of, what we imagine that might be. Well, what do I like? I like streets of gold. I like, I don't know, mini virgins there or something. So whatever the humans liked, we decided that's what heaven is. But and remember, everybody knows that all this comes from the Torah. And what was meant there was Olam Hazeh, this world, is what you're living in. And Olam Haba, the next world, is what you reveal from this world if you study the wisdom of Kabbalah. And you use this remedy to change your most fundamental nature, not to not use it, not to get rid of it, but to change the intention upon it. Not simple to do. It sounds simple, but if we do this correctly, we reveal a whole new reality. And so he's correct in what he says here. He says there are 2 sciences, also with the name they honored them. The one is called Ars Combinandi, and it is a measure of the progress in sciences. So the science of our world, physics, chemistry, biology, botany. The other one treats the forces of higher things which are over the moon. And that doesn't mean that they're somewhere right behind the moon, beyond our solar system. But our solar system, our universe, would all be called this world. If it was, I don't care which, whatever they think. If it was infinite, it would also be called this world. If there were parallel universes, that's also this world. Anything that we can reach from where we are in any natural way or by any technology is all called this world. You go and find some aliens on another planet, that's still called this world. And all of that, the infiniteness, however it seems infinite to us, is all just like a mustard seed compared, or a grain of sand compared to the sand on a beach. So our world and everything in it and everything we can fantasize about is all called this world, Olam Hazeh. Olam Haba, that's what's beyond it, and it is like the ocean compared to that beach, or that beach compared to that sand molecule, grain. And so all of that, though, it is according to one law. It's just that we don't reveal but a small portion of it. And that's why when you reveal the upper world, you just reveal, you can say, an extension of our reality, but a much bigger one that is like the hands in the peekaboo game. That here we see these hands that are everything in our life, and then we discover that maybe there's someone that's controlling this picture, and there is something behind them, and there's a whole bunch of things going on in this upper world. And we're in some very narrow box where we can only see these hands, and that's all we were born into and have ever known. And so that's why he says that for Kabbalists, there's one law of reality. It just depends how much of the reality you reveal. Next, Paulus Riccius, 1480 to 1541. He was an imperial court physician to Maximilian I and prolific translator who transmitted Hebrew scholarship and medical science into Latin, shaping early modern humanism, and learned medicine across Central Europe. So basically, these are the great minds that shaped the knowledge, the sciences that we have now. And he says, the ability to interpret the divine and human secrets by a type of Mosaic law with allegorial sense is called Kabbalah. A literal meaning of Scripture submits to the condition of time and space. Allegorical and Kabbalistic remains for centuries unbounded by time and space. He's correct. So we can read the Torah as a history that was about people, or we can read it the way you tell a story to a child that you don't want to leave the house by themselves so that they would die, get kidnapped. You tell them, once upon a time, there was a little girl, and she thought it would be fun to leave the house. And what did she discover outside is that there is a bear outside that lives around her house and waits for little girls, and so on. You can tell some kind of story, and the more detailed you are, the more nuance, the more things you can teach, the more things you can convey. And all of the Torah is like this. It's a story that has nothing to do with the physical story. Whether there was even a real Moses, a people, a land, that they went to different lands and met different tribes, that some tribes formed out of the people that went to, we don't know, actually. Or it could be that it exists, but on a much smaller scale than we even imagine. Maybe it was a few people that went through this process, and in order to tell it, because it's an internal process, and in order to tell you something that maybe would be hard for you to hear because it's against your ego. Because look, if I tell my little girl, don't go outside, and I give I give the kid some adult reasons why, that I understand there are dangerous kidnappers and stuff. What I do is basically make it more attractive for him to go outside, because the reasons not to go outside, he doesn't understand. They're adult reasons. And telling me not to do something makes me want to do something, makes me want to do that. Reverse psychology. Kabbalists are like the reversed psychologists of our soul. They understand this will to receive pleasure that is our basis, our essence. And they understand that you sort of have to trick it into coming to this new nature, this spiritual nature. Though it is something great, like Bala Sulam says, you'll chop your hands off and okay, it doesn't matter what you promise. You can promise the world. It's like promising a scorpion, you'll really enjoy this symphony. How are you going to get a scorpion to enjoy a symphony is as hard as getting this ego, the will to receive pleasure, to enjoy an opposite property, the property of the Creator. You need to engage in trickery, in special psychology. And we see how, special psychology marketers know how to make you have desires that you don't have. They can make you want cars. And even though, quote unquote, none of the ads work on any of us, right? Not on me. Somehow they know that it's worth it to spend billions of dollars on these ads. So I don't know who it's working on, but it seems to be working. And so we need to learn how to use the tools Kabbalists provide to sort of brainwash, trick. If marketers trick us on purpose against our benefit by knowing our psychology better than we do, then Kabbalists teach us how to use our psychology to cause us to want those things that are more spiritual in nature, good for us, that will lead us out of a state of perpetual darkness that is our life, only punctuated by intermittent sparks of hope for pleasure, and leading us eventually, instead of that, to real pleasure, such that if all of the pleasures that have ever been experienced by any human being in any time in their life, throughout history, all of that was a spark compared to the actual light that we feel when we enter spirituality. So we're talking about here something very great. And these great minds of the past, they apparently understood that. Though today, we don't respect anything. Nothing impresses us. And if we do know about Kabbalah, we think it's something like Madonna invented or something. Okay, next one. Paracelsus. 1493 to 1541, revolutionary physician, chemist. Basel City physician, scorned Galenism, introduced chemical therapeutics and toxicologies, dose principle transforming European medicine and influencing generations of practitioners. And he says simply, learn artem Kabbalisticum. It explains everything. So this person who was foundational to what we now know as chemistry and medicine, he says, just learn Kabbalah. It explains everything. Next, Christian Conrad Sprengel, 1750 to 1816, groundbreaking botanist who proved, now it's interesting what he did versus what he says. Listen. He proved insects' essential role in plant pollination. His 1793 treatise revolutionized floral biology, anticipating Darwin, and earning recognition as an early pioneer of ecological science. And here's what he says. Adam, the first man, and this is a serious scientist, right? So serious that regardless of what he believes, he ended up tangibly improving science, I mean, real science came from this guy that we use today and respect. He knew the signatures. Adam, the very first man, was very familiar with the Kabbalah. He knew the signatures of all things, and hence gave all animals the most suitable names. Therefore, the Hebrew language too contains the best names for all animals, which themselves indicate their nature. Okay, I don't know how he understood this. That's very interesting to me. That's true, that actually the language of Kabbalah, the language of Hebrew itself, isn't a language like other languages. Rather, the Hebrew letters were created by the way that we said that we're a vessel, right? We're an empty vessel. We're a desire to receive. And we're meant to be this way so that we can receive all the goodness, meaning light. And light, that's whatever it is that you want in your desire. There's an infinite sea of light around you. Why aren't you receiving it? Why are you sad? Why aren't you all the time joyous, exuberant, in sublime pleasures? Because there isn't a correct form of this desire. It's in an opposite form to the form in which it can receive the pleasure. So I need to just change inside a little bit, but that little bit is next to impossible. I truly need the wisdom of Kabbalah and a special force that comes from this wisdom of Kabbalah to do it. And when I do that, I said all that to explain that the Hebrew letters were created by Kabbalists discovering the form in which the light can actually enter the vessel. So I said that all of history's pleasures experienced were just a spark, because all that you can experience is a spark, even if you have trillions of dollars and infinite power here in our society. All you can experience ever is a pleasure chase for a spark. But when the light enters the vessel, it enters in these ways that are called letters. And there's internal machinations by which it makes sense to make a vertical line or a horizontal line or a little bit of a slightly slanted line. And by this interaction between this desire to receive that every one of us has and the science of how it can reach fulfillment, which there's nothing else to talk about or do in this world besides that, because that's the Creator's goal of creation. The science of how to do that turns out to be these letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And that's why he's correct here when he says, therefore the Hebrew language too contains the best names for all of the animals, which themselves, meaning those names, just the names themselves indicate the nature of the animal. So this is the perspective of somebody who proved insects' essential role in plant pollination, revolutionized floral biology, anticipating Darwin, and being an early pioneer of ecological science. Okay, so I don't know how he understood that or how much he understood that, but what he said is correct. Okay, Raymond Lull. This is medieval times now, 1232 to 1316. He was this brilliant polymath. He was, smart in every area. Devised combinatorial logic, Ars Magna, authored hundreds of works in Catalan, Latin, Arabic, and influenced later computation logic in universal language projects. Interesting. Okay, he says, Kabbalah, it is becoming clear that its wisdom governs the rest of the sciences. Sciences such as theology, philosophy, and mathematics receive their principles and roots from her, from Kabbalah. And therefore, these sciences are subordinate to that wisdom, and their principles and rules are subordinate to her and insufficient without her. And that's the most interesting line right there. that not only are all of the sciences subordinate to and informed by the wisdom of Kabbalah, but they are insufficient without the wisdom of Kabbalah. And that's what we're going to find out. We're going to become smarter, and we're going to understand that actually maybe in some ways they were a little closer to the truth in medieval times. That all of the philosophers, they call them, or scientists of those times that discovered true things that we still base ourselves on today, they actually believed in some upper force. Whether they attained it or not, I don't know, but they considered themselves to be proving the details of that upper force. And here he's saying that basically without the wisdom of Kabbalah, meaning if you just want to try to prove that everything's random and be a good scientist on an atheistic basis, which I was an atheist, and I think being an atheist is a great foundation for becoming a Kabbalist, actually, because you don't believe nothing. That's a very clean approach to discovering the upper force. And I was a very staunch atheist. But if you want to be a serious scientist, we're not even scratching the surface of science, not in medicine, not even in physics. We know a little bit about physics. We know the most about it because we can take a little section of it and prove it seemingly mathematically and somewhat empirically. But we only scratch the surface even with that. And then the closer that we get to the human, the worse our calculations become, and the more magical, mystical, kind of shamanistic, kind of apothecarian our medicine is, really. And we'll see that. What we're doing medically, harming ourselves, it's because we don't understand this body. We understand a little bit more of the animals, and we understand a little bit more than that, the chemistry part of reality, and we understand even more of the physics. But all of that is just scratching the surface. And what he says here is that really all of our sciences are subordinate to the wisdom of Kabbalah and insufficient without Kabbalah. So really, if you want to become a great scientist, you got to become a Kabbalist. Bruno, 1548 to 1600, daring philosopher of an infinite universe and cosmic pluralism, vigorously advanced Copernican ideas. He says, Kabbalah gives an inexpressible name to the highest principle. From it, 4 principles emanate, from which every one branches out again to 12. Should I explain I don't think I need to explain what, but he's actually correct. It's clear that he studied some Kabbalah. Innumerable kinds and subspecies, and thus they designate with a special name an angel, a reason, a power, which governs over each individual species. And this is, as Kabbalists say, that there's not a blade of grass that grows without a force that strikes it and tells it grow. So nothing is happening for the reasons we think. There's invisible forces governing each and every particle of reality. And you reveal that when you're a Kabbalist. In this way, it is finally revealed that the whole divinity can be affiliated to one original source, as well as the whole light which shines originally and independently, and the images which break into numerous different mirrors, as in just as many individual objects can be led back to a formal and ideal principle, the source of those images. So he's talking about the true science of reality, where you discover that everything comes from a single force, emanates down into this shattered picture of reality, and eventually gets collected back even into a single point where everything is united. all connected, all part of a single system. We're like in a bathtub where you make one ripple, it goes across the whole bathtub. That's the reality we're in. And that a true scientist would see, he couldn't study some little corner like botany and not think that it's connected to each and everything happening in the whole of reality. Okay, Leibniz, he invented calculus, co-invented it with Isaac Newton, but independently. Pioneer of binary arithmetic, formal logic, and mechanical computation, diplomat, scholar who founded the Berlin Academy and shaped Enlightenment science across Europe. He says, since people did not possess the right key to the secret, the thirst for knowledge here eventually led to vanities and superstition of all kinds, from which ultimately developed a kind of vulgar Kabbalah that lies far away from the true one, as well as diverse fantastic theories under the false name of magic. The books are teeming with those. It's interesting. He was not a Kabbalist, and yet he understood that from Kabbalah, which is something true and which he respected, and we see that scientists throughout the centuries greatly respected and thought was the root of all science. But he understood that out of Kabbalah, they made all kinds of magic, horoscopes, dream interpretation, find your soulmate, romantic stuff, wear a red string, interpret the letters, meditate upon the letters, put a Zohar book in your house to protect you from fire. And we see that today this is still going on. But it all started with a misinterpretation and fantasy, really wanting to just, he says it really well here, right? The thirst for knowledge here led to vanities and superstitions, because through knowledge, you can't understand the wisdom of Kabbalah, only through attainment. And in this time, his time, it was impossible to attain the wisdom of Kabbalah. So all you could do is confuse yourself, because you couldn't become a real Kabbalist, because Kabbalists hid that and they only taught it maybe to one person or a handful of people in the generation, meaning existing in the entire world at any given time. There was one or two Kabbalists, maybe a few Kabbalists, but most people, all they could do is get confused, and the fact that they had books of Kabbalah wasn't to their benefit because they spun it into all kinds of business, red string, dreams, and so on, magic, etc. Okay, Goethe, 1749 to 1832. He was a titan of letters and science, author of Faust, etc. Very respected intellectual. He said, and I'm just including him just to show that he knew about it. The Kabbalistic treatment of the Bible is a hermeneutics which lives up in a convincing way to the independence, the marvelous originality, the versatility, the totality, I would say even the immeasurability of its contents. Okay. Kircher, 1600s. A Jesuit polymath whose encyclopedic work on Egyptology and magnetism pioneered comparative religion and geology, earning him the title Master of 100 Arts. And he says, the Kabbalah is the most ancient and sublime philosophy, containing the secrets of divine creation and the harmony of the universe. Okay, now I want to go to some Kabbalists. What do actual Kabbalists say? So this was Rav Kook. He was chief rabbi of Israel, but he was also secretly a great Kabbalist. He said, just as man should be accustomed to material nature and its forces, we got to know how to live in our world. The better we do, the better we'll live. And study its ways and actions by the same rules that govern the world, of which we are a part, and which control within him as they control without. So, and even more so, he should and he must be accustomed to the rules of the spiritual nature, which govern the whole of reality, which he is a part. So just like you need to learn not to cross the street when you have a red light, and you need to, all the laws of our world, you got to know how to live. The better you know, the better you understand that, the more successful you'll be. Well, he says that actually, without knowing the laws of spiritual nature, you really have no hope of success, meaning not true success. So you got to learn the wisdom of Kabbalah. And finally, just to wrap it up, Bala Sulam, the great 20th century Kabbalist that we study, where the wisdom of philosophy ends, the wisdom of Kabbalah begins. Plato and his Greek predecessors had acquired their ideas while studying with the disciples of the prophets in Israel. So they came to Israel and studied with Kabbalists. They've stolen the basic elements from the wisdom of Israel. Okay, so there you have it. The wisdom of Kabbalah is the foundation of all of the sciences. And this will be clearly revealed. It's not an argument. It will be clearly revealed. It's the foundation of all of the philosophies, meaning you can spin it, tell stories around it, but when we undress it down to what's fundamental about it, meaning I can put like some phone case on my phone, I can dress it up, I can do it, but when we get down to what it actually does, the text messages, the videos, and so on, when we get down to what the philosophies, the sciences, the religion, down to what they actually do, their functionality, it all comes from the wisdom of Kabbalah. And the wisdom of Kabbalah, by it, we attain everything else, all of the sciences, and we must eventually, every person, to be happy in this world and beyond it, has to eventually study the wisdom of Kabbalah. And with that, we'll see you next week here on Kabbalah Explained Simply.